The galaxy's strongest warrior towered over all who dared to stand before him, a living monolith of muscle and power, his presence a force of nature in its own right. His skin, a rough, impenetrable hide, gleamed with a metallic sheen under the harsh lights of countless battlefields. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to burn with an inner fire, a testament to the countless souls he had vanquished. He was not just a warrior, he was a legend, a creature whose name alone could send shivers down the spines of even the most hardened soldiers across the galaxy. His strength was beyond comprehension, a gift from his kind that had been honed through years of relentless combat. His fists, the size of boulders, had crushed the skulls of warriors from 100 worlds, and his massive frame had withstood the mightiest blows without so much as a flinch. He moved with a grace that belied his size, each step a calculated display of power. His victories were as numerous as the stars in the sky, each one adding to the mythos that surrounded him. Entire civilizations had fallen to their knees before him, their greatest champions laid low by his unrelenting might. Stories of his conquests spread far and wide, whispered in the dark corners of cantinas and shouted in the arenas where he reigned supreme. He had faced beasts of unimaginable size, machines of destruction designed solely to end his life, and armies that stretched across the horizon. Yet none had ever come close to defeating him. The warrior had faced every possible challenge, from one-on-one duels to battles against entire battalions, and each time he emerged victorious. His dominance was absolute, his power unrivaled. His reputation alone was often enough to decide the outcome of a battle before it even began. Many who were called to face him found their courage fleeing before they ever laid eyes on the Titan himself. There was no shame in surrendering to him. It was simply understood that to stand against him was to embrace inevitable death. The arena where he resided was a fortress of unimaginable scale, a monument to his victories and a symbol of his unassailable strength. Built from the remains of worlds he had conquered, it was a place where the air itself seemed to hum with the echoes of past battles. The stands, filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy, were always packed to capacity, each spectator eager to witness the next inevitable triumph. They came not to see a fight, but to see a display of the galaxy's greatest power. The warrior's very presence cast a long shadow over the arena, his towering figure standing as a constant reminder of the futility of resistance. Those who entered the arena to face him did so under no illusions. They knew they were walking into a grave, one carved by the warrior's own hands. But within the warrior, beneath the layers of muscle and power, a seed of dissatisfaction had begun to take root. Victory after victory, he found himself feeling less and less fulfilled. Each opponent fell faster than the last, and the thrill of battle, once a fire in his veins, had begun to cool. He had fought for so long, conquered so much, that there was little left to challenge him. The adulation of the crowds, the awe of those who witnessed his strength, none of it stirred his soul as it once did. He was the greatest, of that there was no doubt, but what was greatness without a worthy challenge? It was in this state of restless contemplation that the message arrived, delivered by a trembling courier who barely managed to keep his composure in the warrior's presence. The message was simple, direct, and yet it carried with it a weight that caught the warrior's attention like nothing had in years. A human, a creature from a species known more for their cunning than their strength, had issued a challenge. Not just any challenge, but a series of trials designed to test the very limits of the warrior's strength, endurance, and will. The audacity of it was almost laughable. A human, challenging the galaxy's strongest warrior? It was a notion so absurd that the warrior found himself intrigued despite himself. What could this being possibly hope to achieve? How could one so physically inferior expect to stand against him? And yet, there was something in the challenge, a spark of defiance that resonated with the warrior's own growing desire for something more, something that could rekindle the fire that had once driven him to conquer the stars. The warrior's interest was piqued, his mind already envisioning the trials to come. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of anticipation, a thrill at the thought of facing an unknown challenge. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human would be different. Perhaps this challenge, ridiculous as it seemed, was exactly what he needed. The warrior sent his response, a simple acceptance of the challenge, with no promise of mercy. He would face this human, and if nothing else, he would crush the audacity out of the creature. But deep down, in a place he barely acknowledged, the warrior hoped for more. He hoped for a challenge that would push him, test him, and remind him of what it truly meant to be the strongest in the galaxy. The stage was set, the players chosen. Now, all that remained was to see if this human could deliver what so many others had failed to provide, a reason for the galaxy's strongest warrior to fight with all his might. The human stood on the barren surface of what was once his home, a planet now reduced to ash and ruins. The air, once filled with the sounds of life and laughter, was now heavy with silence and the lingering scent of smoke. He was one of the few who had survived the onslaught, but survival had come at a cost. His family, his friends, everything he had known and loved, was gone. The destruction was not just physical. It was a scar etched deep into his soul, a wound that festered with every passing day. The memory of the attack replayed in his mind constantly, the blinding flashes of energy weapons, the deafening roar of collapsing buildings, and the screams of those who didn't make it. He had been helpless then, powerless to save them. But that feeling of helplessness had ignited something within him, a resolve as unbreakable as the metal beneath his feet. In the aftermath, the human had wandered the galaxy, driven not by the need for revenge, but by a burning desire for justice. He sought out the galaxy's strongest warrior, the one who, in his eyes, was responsible for allowing such devastation to occur. It was said that this warrior had the power to stop such horrors, yet he had chosen not to, preferring instead to bask in the glory of his own strength. The human's journey was not easy. He was not a soldier by birth, nor did he possess any extraordinary abilities. But he had something that many stronger beings lacked, an indomitable will. Through countless hardships, he trained his body and mind, pushing himself to the limits of endurance. He learned to fight, not with brute strength, but with strategy, agility, and the fierce determination that came from knowing he had nothing left to lose. His journey took him through dangerous territories, where he faced beings far more powerful than himself. Yet each battle, each struggle, only sharpened his resolve. He grew leaner, quicker, and his mind became a steel trap, focused solely on one goal: to challenge the warrior who had become a symbol of unchecked power in the galaxy. Every step brought him closer to that inevitable confrontation, and with each step, his confidence grew, not in his ability to win, but in his ability to make a stand, to show the galaxy that even the smallest of beings could rise against the greatest of foes. When the human finally arrived at the warrior's arena, the contrast could not have been more stark. The arena, a massive structure built to celebrate the might of the galaxy's strongest warrior, loomed before him like a mountain. The warrior's domain was a place where only the most formidable dared to enter, and where those who did seldom left alive. The human, in his worn and battle-scarred attire, appeared almost insignificant in comparison to the grandeur around him. As he stepped into the arena, the crowd erupted in laughter and jeers, unable to believe that such a puny creature would dare to challenge their champion. The warrior himself, standing tall and imposing in the center of the arena, looked down at the human with a mixture of amusement and disdain. But the human did not flinch. He had expected this reaction. After all, he was no stranger to being underestimated. His entire journey had been marked by the disbelief of others, by their failure to see past his unassuming exterior. It was this underestimation that had allowed him to survive for so long, to defeat opponents who were stronger and faster. Now, facing the greatest challenge of his life, he felt a calmness settle over him. The laughter of the crowd, the dismissive gaze of the warrior, none of it mattered. What mattered was the purpose that had driven him here, the promise he had made to the ghosts of his past. The warrior, still amused, decided to entertain the human's challenge. He had faced countless opponents, each one more powerful than the last, and had defeated them all with ease. This human was no different, just another in a long line of fools who thought they could best him. But there was something in the human's eyes, a burning intensity that caught the warrior's attention. It wasn't fear, no, it was something else, something the warrior hadn't seen in a long time. Was it determination? A belief in something greater than strength alone? The warrior couldn't quite place it, but it intrigued him enough to accept the challenge, if only to crush this human spirit and see that fire extinguished. The human's voice was steady as he issued his challenge, clear and unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. He spoke not of revenge, but of justice, of holding the powerful accountable for their actions. His words were not those of a desperate man seeking to avenge his fallen loved ones, but of someone who believed that even in the face of certain defeat, there was honor in standing up for what was right. The warrior, despite himself, felt a flicker of respect for the human's resolve. But respect would not stay his hand. It would only make the inevitable victory all the sweeter. As the crowd continued to jeer, the human stood his ground, undeterred. He knew that this would be the greatest fight of his life, but he also knew that it was a fight worth having. He wasn't here to win. He was here to show that there was more to strength than raw power. The first trial loomed ahead, and with it, the chance to prove that even the smallest voice could make a difference, that even the weakest could stand tall in the face of overwhelming might. The stage was set, and the human was ready to face the trials that awaited him, no matter the cost. The first trial was announced with great fanfare, a spectacle designed to showcase the overwhelming might of the galaxy's strongest warrior. It was to be a test of endurance, a marathon across a brutal landscape that no ordinary being could hope to survive. The terrain was a nightmare made manifest, a desolate wasteland of jagged rocks, searing heat, and hidden dangers lurking at every turn. It was a place where even the air seemed to conspire against those who dared to breathe it, thick with dust and the scent of decay. The path was long, winding through treacherous cliffs and across vast stretches of barren desert, ending at the summit of a towering mountain that scraped the sky. The trial was not just about physical stamina. It was a battle against the very elements themselves. The crowd, packed into the colossal arena, buzzed with anticipation. They had seen the warrior triumph in countless battles, but this was something different. The notion of a human, a being so physically inferior, even attempting such a trial was absurd. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that the warrior would dominate, as he always had. The human was viewed as little more than an afterthought, a sacrificial lamb thrown into the lion's den for the amusement of the masses. The warrior himself was confident, his mind already focused on the victory he believed was certain. He had faced challenges far greater than this. What was one more trial to add to his list of conquests? When the trial began, the warrior surged forward with the power and speed of a hurricane. His massive legs pounded the earth, each step propelling him further and faster than any normal being could hope to achieve. He leaped over obstacles with ease, his immense strength allowing him to bulldoze through anything in his path. Boulders crumbled beneath his fists, and the searing heat that would have slowed others to a crawl seemed to have no effect on him. The warrior was a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. The human, in contrast, was barely a speck on the horizon, struggling to keep up with the blistering pace set by his opponent. To the spectators, it seemed inevitable that the human would collapse long before the trial was over. But the human had not come to this trial unprepared. He knew that he could not match the warrior's strength, but endurance was a different matter. While the warrior relied on his raw power, the human employed strategy. He paced himself, moving steadily through the obstacles, carefully choosing when to conserve energy and when to push forward. He did not waste time or energy trying to smash through the rocks or leap over the chasms. Instead, he found ways around them, using the landscape to his advantage. Where the warrior charged headlong into danger, the human moved with caution, avoiding traps and pitfalls with a keen eye. He knew this trial was not a sprint but a marathon, and he was determined to endure, no matter how long it took. As the trial wore on, the warrior's initial burst of energy began to wane. His confidence, so absolute at the start, had led him to expend his strength recklessly. He had smashed through walls of stone, hurled himself across impossible gaps, and fought through the blistering heat without hesitation. But now, the toll of his exertion was beginning to show. His breaths came heavier, his steps less sure. The sweat that glistened on his brow was no longer a sign of exertion but of exhaustion. He had expected the human to have collapsed by now, But when he glanced back, he saw his challenger still moving, still pressing forward with an unyielding determination that defied all logic. The human, though battered and weary, refused to give in. His body screamed with every step, muscles burning with the effort of continuing on, but his mind was sharp, focused on the goal ahead. He had come too far, sacrificed too much, to falter now. With each passing moment, he closed the gap between himself and the warrior, his steady pace and careful strategy beginning to pay off. The spectators, once so certain of the outcome, began to murmur in disbelief as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. As they neared the final stretch, the warrior, his pride now stinging from the realization that he was no longer alone at the front, pushed himself even harder. But his body, pushed beyond its limits, began to betray him. His vision blurred, his legs trembled, and his once powerful strides became a stagger. The summit was in sight, just a few hundred meters away, but it might as well have been 1,000. The warrior, for the first time in his life, felt the cold touch of doubt as his body refused to obey his commands. The human, seeing his chance, summoned the last reserves of his strength. He could feel the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him, but he pushed it aside. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had fought for. With one final burst of speed, he surged past the warrior, his eyes fixed on the summit. The ground beneath him seemed to blur as he ran, every muscle in his body crying out in pain, but he did not stop. He would not stop, not until he crossed that finish line. The crowd fell silent as the human, battered and bloody, crossed the finish line first. The warrior, only steps behind, collapsed to the ground, his body finally giving out. The silence in the arena was deafening, the disbelief palpable. How could this human, this insignificant creature, have possibly defeated the galaxy's strongest warrior in a trial of endurance? It was unthinkable, yet it had happened. The warrior, struggling to rise, looked up at the human with a new emotion in his eyes, doubt. For the human, there was no celebration, no gloating over his victory. He knew this was just the beginning, the first of many trials to come. But this victory, however small, had strengthened his resolve. He had shown that endurance, not just strength, was a true measure of a warrior. The warrior, still on his knees, was left to grapple with the unfamiliar taste of defeat, while the human, his body aching but his spirit unbroken, steeled himself for the challenges that lay ahead. The second trial was unlike any the warrior had faced before. It was not a test of physical strength but one of strategy, a battle of wits designed to test the mind rather than the body. The arena transformed into a vast, simulated battlefield, a labyrinthine landscape filled with hidden dangers, limited resources, and countless possibilities for deception. It was a place where brute force alone would not suffice. Here, intellect and cunning were the weapons of choice. The rules were simple: each combatant had to outmaneuver the other, using whatever means necessary to achieve victory. The warrior, standing tall and imposing, remained confident. He had seen countless battles, fought in endless wars, and emerged victorious every time. In his mind, this trial was just another conflict to conquer, another opponent to crush underfoot. He believed that his experience and instincts, honed through years of combat, would carry him to victory. After all, he had faced the most dangerous foes in the galaxy and defeated them all. What challenge could this trial possibly present that he could not overcome? As the trial began, the warrior charged forward, his instincts guiding him as they always had. But he quickly realized that this battlefield was different. There were no enemies to engage head-on, no clear paths to victory. Every step he took seemed to lead him into a dead end or a trap. The landscape shifted and changed, revealing new dangers and challenges at every turn. The warrior, accustomed to straightforward combat, found himself increasingly frustrated by the elusive nature of the trial. His usual tactics, overwhelming force and direct confrontation, were ineffective here. Meanwhile, the human moved with a calculated precision, carefully analyzing the battlefield before making any decisions. He knew that he could not match the warrior in strength, so he focused on what he could control: his mind. He observed the warrior's movements, noting the patterns and tendencies that had become so ingrained in his opponent's behavior. The human anticipated where the warrior would go, what traps he would fall into, and how he would react to certain situations. And with each move, the human tightened the noose, slowly but surely drawing the warrior into a web of deception. The warrior, for all his might, struggled to adapt. He was used to being in control, to dominating his opponents with sheer power. But here, in this trial, power meant little. He found himself repeatedly outmaneuvered, forced into disadvantageous positions by the human's cunning. Every time he thought he had gained the upper hand, the battlefield would shift, and the human would slip away, leaving the warrior to wonder how he had been so easily outfoxed. The frustration mounted as the warrior realized that he was not just fighting the human, he was fighting his own limitations, his own over-reliance on strength. As the trial progressed, the human's strategy became clear. He was not trying to defeat the warrior in a direct confrontation. Instead, he was wearing him down, forcing him to expend energy and resources on fruitless pursuits. The human set up ambushes that led nowhere, created distractions that lured the warrior away from critical objectives, and manipulated the battlefield to keep the warrior constantly on the defensive. It was a game of cat and mouse, and the human was always one step ahead. The climax of the trial came when the warrior, believing he had finally cornered the human, charged into what he thought was the final battle. But it was a trap, a carefully orchestrated ploy designed to exploit the warrior's overconfidence. The human had led him to this point, setting the stage for a decisive victory. As the warrior lunged forward, the ground beneath him gave way, revealing a pitfall that the human had prepared earlier. The warrior fell, his mighty form crashing into the trap with a force that shook the arena. For a moment, there was silence. The crowd, stunned by the sudden turn of events, could scarcely believe what they had just witnessed. The galaxy's strongest warrior, the undefeated Titan, had been outsmarted, not by strength, but by strategy. The human, standing at the edge of the pit, looked down at the warrior with no trace of arrogance or triumph, only a calm, resolute determination. He had won, but he knew the battle was far from over. There was still one more trial to face, and he would need every ounce of his willpower to see it through. The warrior, humiliated and enraged, struggled to climb out of the pit. His pride, more than his body, had been wounded. He had never considered that someone so physically inferior could defeat him, much less in a trial of strategy. As he pulled himself up, he began to question everything he had believed about strength and power. Was brute force truly the ultimate path to victory, or had he been blind to other forms of strength all along? The realization was bitter, but it was also a turning point. For the first time, the warrior understood that his might alone was not enough. He had to adapt, to learn from his mistakes if he hoped to win the final trial. As he stood on the battlefield, his eyes met the human's, and in that moment, he saw not just an opponent, but a teacher, someone who had shown him that there was more to being strong than just muscle and power. The human, seeing the warrior's change in demeanor, did not linger. He turned and walked away, preparing himself for the final trial. He knew that this victory was only a step toward his ultimate goal, and he could not afford to lose focus now. The true test was yet to come, and he would need every bit of strength, both physical and mental, to face it. As he left the battlefield, the warrior remained behind, contemplating the lessons he had just learned, and wondering if he could truly overcome the challenge that lay ahead. The final trial was a test of willpower, a challenge that transcended physical strength and entered the realm of the mind and spirit. It was a trial designed to break even the strongest of beings, pushing them to the very edge of their sanity and endurance. The warrior, now desperate to reclaim his honor after 2 consecutive defeats, was determined to prove that his indomitable will was unmatched. He believed that no one, not even this human who had bested him twice, could withstand the torture that awaited in this trial. In his mind, the human would finally be broken, and the natural order of the universe, where the strongest ruled, would be restored. As the trial began, the arena was silent, the spectators watching with bated breath. This was not a spectacle of combat but one of endurance, where the contestants would face unimaginable pain and psychological torment. The goal was simple: endure without surrendering. The warrior, towering and formidable, braced himself, convinced that his immense physical strength would carry him through the ordeal. The human, standing opposite, looked small and fragile in comparison, yet there was an undeniable calm in his demeanor, a quiet confidence that unsettled even the most ardent believers in the warrior's supremacy. The agony began almost immediately. The trial's physical aspects were brutal, involving the infliction of excruciating pain that could bring even the strongest beings to their knees. The warrior, with his hardened body, initially withstood the pain with relative ease. His muscles tensed and flexed as he absorbed the punishment, a testament to his legendary endurance. However, this was only the beginning. The true nature of the trial lay in its psychological components, designed to attack the mind and spirit, to unearth and exploit one's deepest fears and insecurities. For the warrior, the psychological assault was unexpected and devastating. He had always relied on his physical prowess to overcome challenges, but here, his strength was of little use. The trial dredged up memories of his past failures, of moments when his strength alone had not been enough. It whispered doubts into his mind, questioning his worth and the true source of his power. As the trial progressed, the warrior found himself increasingly rattled, his once unshakable confidence beginning to crumble under the relentless pressure. The pain, once a mere inconvenience, began to intensify, exacerbated by the mounting fear and self-doubt that gnawed at his resolve. The human, on the other hand, faced the trial with a stoic determination that seemed almost inhuman. Every wave of pain that washed over him was met with silent endurance. The psychological attacks, meant to break his spirit, only served to strengthen his resolve. He drew upon the memories of his destroyed colony, the faces of loved ones lost, and the injustices that had driven him to this point. These thoughts became his armor, shielding him from the torment and fueling his determination to endure. The human knew that this was more than just a trial. It was the culmination of everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed. As the trial dragged on, the contrast between the two became stark. The warrior, once so confident in his superiority, began to falter. His physical strength, which had always been his greatest asset, was useless against the psychological onslaught. He started to question his purpose, his very existence, as the trial pushed him further into the depths of despair. The human, despite his battered and bruised body, remained steadfast. His willpower was unyielding, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness that surrounded them. He refused to give in, his mind focused solely on enduring until the end. The breaking point came when the warrior, his mind shattered and his body weakened, could no longer endure the torment. With a final, agonized cry, he collapsed, his immense form crumpling to the ground. The crowd, which had been hushed in anticipation, erupted into a mixture of gasps and murmurs. The galaxy's strongest warrior, the undefeated Titan, had been defeated, not by a stronger foe, but by one whose spirit could not be broken. The human, though battered and worn, remained standing, his victory a testament to the power of will over physical strength. In the aftermath, the warrior, now a shadow of his former self, looked up at the human with a newfound respect and humility. He had been defeated in every sense, not just physically but also mentally and spiritually. For the first time in his life, he understood that true strength was not about muscles or power, but about the heart and mind. The human, who had come to the arena seeking justice and closure, had not only achieved his goal but had also taught the warrior a lesson that would resonate throughout the galaxy. The human did not linger to bask in his victory. He simply turned and walked away, leaving the arena and the broken warrior behind. He had not come to conquer or to claim a throne. He had come to prove that even the smallest among us could stand tall against the mightiest of foes. His victory was not just for himself, but for all those who had ever been oppressed or underestimated. As he left, the spectators, once so sure of the warrior's invincibility, were left to ponder the true meaning of strength. The warrior, still on his knees, watched the human leave. He knew that his life would never be the same, that he could never return to the way things were before. But in his defeat he found a strange sense of peace. He had finally met a challenger who had shown him that strength was more than just power. It was the will to endure, to fight on even when all seemed lost. And in that moment he understood that he had not just lost the trial, he had gained a new understanding of what it truly meant to be strong. The once mighty warrior, who had towered over the galaxy as its strongest, now sat in quiet contemplation. His defeat at the hands of a human had been a humbling experience, shattering the invincible image he had built over countless victories. In the days following the trial, the warrior found himself revisiting the moments of his loss, not with bitterness, but with a deep sense of reflection. He began to understand that strength, as he had always known it, was only a fraction of what it truly meant to be strong. In his solitude, the warrior thought about the qualities the human had displayed, qualities he had once dismissed as irrelevant. The human's intelligence had outmaneuvered him in the trial of strategy, turning the tide against a physically superior opponent. The endurance shown during the marathon had revealed that strength was not just about muscle, but about the will to keep going even when every fiber of the body screamed in protest. And finally, the human's unbreakable spirit during the trial of willpower had demonstrated a level of strength that transcended the physical realm, touching something deeper, something the warrior had never fully grasped before. The warrior realized that his entire life had been a pursuit of dominance, of proving his physical superiority over others. But in doing so, he had overlooked the importance of intelligence, endurance, and most crucially, the spirit that drives one to keep fighting against impossible odds. The human had shown him that true strength was a combination of all these elements, working together to form a force that was far more powerful than brute strength alone. As he reflected on these lessons, the warrior felt a sense of peace. His defeat had not been the end, but a new beginning, a chance to redefine his understanding of strength. He no longer felt the need to prove himself through physical contests. Instead, he was content to learn from his defeat, to grow in ways he had never imagined possible. The warrior knew that he would never again be the same, and for the first time, he was grateful for that change. Meanwhile, the human, now a legend in his own right, continued his journey across the galaxy. But he was not seeking more battles or accolades. The victory over the galaxy's strongest warrior had not filled him with pride, but with a sense of responsibility. He understood that his story had become a beacon of hope for others, a reminder that even the smallest and seemingly weakest could rise against the mightiest of foes. Wherever he went, the human shared his message of resilience and hope. He visited colonies still recovering from oppression, offering words of encouragement and stories of his own journey. He taught others that strength was not just about physical power, but about the determination to stand up for what was right, no matter the odds. His story inspired countless others to believe in their own strength, leading to small revolutions across the galaxy. The oppressed began to rise, emboldened by the human's example, challenging those who ruled through fear and domination. The impact of the human's victory spread far and wide, sending shockwaves through the galaxy. The warrior's empire, once unchallenged and built on the foundation of his unmatched strength, began to crumble. No longer did fear keep the masses in check. Instead, they were inspired by the human's example to seek their own freedom and justice. The concept of strength itself was being redefined. No longer was it seen purely in terms of physical power, but as a more holistic force that included intelligence, endurance, and spirit. Other warriors, once in awe of the galaxy's strongest warrior, began to question their own paths. They saw that brute strength was not the ultimate measure of a warrior and started to value the other aspects of strength that the human had exemplified. The galaxy entered a new era, one where strength was respected in all its forms, and where those who had once been downtrodden found their own power within. As the human continued his journey, he never sought to build an empire or amass followers. His mission was not one of conquest, but of empowerment. He wanted others to see that they too could be strong, that they too could overcome the challenges they faced, no matter how insurmountable they seemed. His story became a legend, passed down through generations, a reminder of the power of the human spirit. In the end, the story of the human and the galaxy's strongest warrior became a tale not just of victory and defeat, but of transformation. It showed that true strength was not static but dynamic, something that could grow and evolve. The warrior, once invincible, had learned that his greatest defeat was also his greatest lesson. And the human, who had started as a lone survivor seeking justice, had become a symbol of resilience, inspiring a galaxy to redefine what it meant to be strong. As the tale came to a close, it left the audience with a powerful message. Strength is not just about power, but about the will to endure, the intelligence to outthink, and the spirit to never give up. It is about facing the impossible and standing firm in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, true strength lies not in the body, but in the heart and mind. And it is this strength that can change the world, one victory at a time.